Welcome to First. I'm Nichelle Poston along with Shirley Min and Mark Eichman. The history of African Americans in Delaware is a complicated story. 2 steps were taken this week to shed some light on that history.
The recent history of baseball is bright. The Blue Rocks of Wilmington are so excited about their future, they're looking for ways to expand their stadium in 2016.
And the Polar Bear Plunge for 2016 is history, but our first experience visits with an artist who has a special way to honor those who support Special Olympics. First, your public media news magazine starts now.
This week on First, we look at 2 aspects of African American culture. In a moment, we'll go behind the scenes of the new African American Center along with our content partner, Delaware Today. Part of that heritage is steeped in slavery. This week, Delaware Governor Jack Markell took a step to acknowledge that dark period in Delaware history.
And this egregious sin of prior generations is not merely a fact of our state's past. We can't separate slavery from the challenges that we face today in pursuit of ensuring Delawareans of all races have the opportunity to pursue their dreams and realize their potential.
You can read more on newsworks.org/Delaware. Now to our first look, the African American Heritage Center. Much of the focus will be on African American history when the center opens in Wilmington. It's our content partner project with Delaware Today this month.
African American history is rich, vibrant, an integral part of the history of this nation.
The history of Delaware traces as far back as the 1600s. For years, the focus of the first state's history has centered on early European settlers.
The Delaware Historical Society, like many other historical organizations, really focused on the history of white people and primarily, shall we say, wealthy, politically connected white people.
While some stories about Delaware's African American experience have been presented, the wide-reaching contributions of blacks in the first state have been ignored. That is, until now.
Several years ago, the Delaware Historical Society received a grant from the city of Wilmington to create a Center for African American Heritage.
Peter Spencer, founder of the African Union Churches, and his mentor and colleague Richard Allen are a few early settlers whose contributions will be featured at length at Wilmington Center of African American Heritage.
This exhibit covers more than 300 years of our shared history in Delaware involving the African American experience. The 2 overarching themes encompass quite a bit.
The center will also delve deeper into the role Delaware played to free enslaved Africans.
The exhibit features Delaware's distinct Underground Railroad history, including our governor's recently well-publicized pardon of Samuel Burris, the abolitionist who was arrested and convicted of assisting freedom seekers more than 160 years ago.
The Center for African American Heritage has been in the works for several years. Now, the many stories that have impacted Delaware and beyond will get a chance to emerge from the shadows.
We have here in Wilmington the Beulah and Belton cases, which became a part of the larger Brown versus Board of Education landmark case that led to the desegregation of public schools in the country.
The Delaware Historical Society has been collecting and researching the contributions of African Americans for more than 150 years. The researchers are excited to finally be able to display some of the items from its collection.
For example, some of the highlights include, we have a ribbon, it's like a ribbon badge from the Afro-American Social Club of Lewis, Delaware in 1892, I think it is, that somebody wore when they're going to an Emancipation Day celebration. One of the real goosebumps objects that we have is a silver tray that was presented to Thomas Garrett in 1866. Thomas Garrett was the leader, the station master of Delaware's participation in the Underground Railroad.
Scott Lear, CEO of the Historical Society, says the opening of the Center for African American Heritage is the first step to a new phase for the organization and the entire state of Delaware.
It's an important time for this organization, but more importantly, it's an opportunity for people to learn more about new chapters, newly presented chapters in Delaware history, and to gain a better understanding of all the peoples who have contributed to the state and what it is today.
In a few months, those rooms will be filled with artifacts and stories of Delaware's rich African American history. It took several years and lots of dedication and determination by many of Delaware's African American leaders to bring the Center for African American Heritage to fruition. Our partners at Delaware Today magazine captured the ups and downs of this project in this month's Making History story.
And so, Nichelle, a lot of people will remember kind of a lot of the hurdles that were in the way to prevent this from happening. How were organizers able to overcome that?
Well, Mark, collaboration is the key word here. All of the stakeholders in this project had to put aside personal preferences and pretty much work together. Those involved believe the center will delight all parties, as well as pretty much enlighten all of us.
And then the big question, when can we get inside and take a look?
Okay, well, there's been a bit of a delay. I'm sure you know about that. But the feeling now is the opening will be pushed to this summer. Then we can all go to 505 North Market Street for a look inside.
Great. Sounds like a plan. Thanks, Nichelle. Delaware Today is a content partner with First. You can go online to delawaretoday.com to read more on the history of this project. Now let's turn to another Wilmington attraction. And trust me when I tell you, spring will be here before you know it. And to prove that, we can report that pitchers and catchers are reporting for baseball spring training in just a few days. That means the return of the Blue Rocks to Wilmington can't be far behind. When the team does return, they'll see a new fan-friendly stadium. Through the snow and rain, workers at Wilmington's Frawley Stadium are busy with the first phase of a long-term plan to upgrade the 24-year-old facility.
Right now, we're replacing every one of the seats in the seating bowl. Going to be an entirely new seating bowl when people get here in April, and we're so excited about that.
New individual seats instead of bleacher seats is an upgrade, but Rock's co-owner Dave Heller has even bigger changes in mind in the coming years.
You look over my shoulder and you can see the outfield fence. We want to turn this into a 360-degree concourse. We want it to be a ballpark that people can move around and go from one end of the park to the other and walk completely around.
Heller also owns the Quad Cities River Bandits in Iowa. Quad City Stadium recently added attractions including a Ferris wheel, bumper cars, and other activities to draw fans in addition to the game on the field.
We want to do more games. We want to have more bounce houses. We want to bring in some rides like I've done in my other parks. You know, I put in the only Ferris wheel in all of minor league baseball in Quad Cities. I want to do something along those lines, not a Ferris wheel per se, but something fun here in Wilmington. We want to keep growing the ballpark. We want to keep expanding it and making it more fun for families.
There's focus on the field, too. Heller recently introduced longtime Major League player and coach Jamie Quirk as the Rock's new manager.
I'm looking forward to the cool ballpark, the tradition Wilmington has. I am excited. The Royals are a tremendous organization, obviously reigning world champs. They do things the right way, and that's why they are here, is Wilmington does things the right way.
And yes, being affiliated with the reigning World Series champs has its perks too.
And that's really kind of neat, that people know that for $5, $8, they can come here and they can meet the World Series champions of tomorrow right here in Wilmington today.
For 24 years, the ballpark has anchored the Wilmington riverfront.
You look around and you see all these new restaurants, and now we've got mini golf, and you've got trampoline, jump places, and a ton of new residential building. And so there really is a cool synergy that's coming down where the riverfront is the fun place to go in Wilmington and, again, really throughout the region.
In addition to new seats, Frawley Stadium will also be getting new lights along with the rides and other attractions that are coming in future years. Attendance continues to be solid with more than 280,000 fans at the ballpark last year. That's an average of about 4,100 per game. And while it might not feel like it this February weekend, Blue Rock's opening day is roughly 50 days away. First pitch in Wilmington is scheduled for April 7th.
Coming up on First, it takes a certain kind of person to just jump in the ocean in early February. It also takes a special kind of person who wants to honor those hardy souls. Check out First Experience in about 10 minutes.
Our Days on Business segment returns this month with a conversation about DuPont. Robert Fry Jr. is an economist and a former DuPont employee. He sits down with WHYY contributor Dace Blaskovitz.
Robert Fry Jr., welcome to the segment.
Thanks, Dace.
Let's jump right into it. Tell us what happened to DuPont, let's say, over the last 3-4 years.
Well, I think what happened was they set some totally unrealistic earnings growth targets, and I'm talking in terms of both long-term growth targets and the shorter-term guidance that they gave Wall Street. And then they took some, let's call them suboptimal actions in order to hit those targets, at least in the short run. And I think that includes some acquisitions and divestitures done in an effort to hit the long-term growth targets. And then shorter term, you would stop projects in order to make the quarterly earnings target. But I think the biggest action, adverse action that hurt DuPont was a series of price increases from mid-2010 to mid-2011. And in the short term, they boosted earnings. They worked very well. They helped make those quarterly earnings targets. And that's because in the short term, your customers can't react to a price increase. They pretty much have to keep paying it. In the longer term, though, they shop around, they qualify other suppliers, they may reformulate their products, and they use a whole lot less of what you've been selling them. And so that, in the long term, started to hurt DuPont's volumes and market share. And just as those chickens started to come home to roost, DuPont got hit by a perfect storm of external forces. The first of those was the beginning of the slowdown in China. I was looking back at my old newsletter, and I first wrote about that in May of 2010. So it was starting to slow in 2010. It was at first a gradual slowdown. Then again, they slowed much more sharply in 2013 and again in 2015. I remember writing about the slowdown in China in both April 2013 and April 2015. So you had the slowdown in China. You also had the agriculture economy roll over. It had 3 phenomenally strong above-trend years, 2010, 2011, 2012, driven by the Renewable Fuel Standard, the RFS2, and a 3-year global drought that forced up corn prices in particular, soybean prices as well. That was great for farmers, and the farmers had plenty of money to buy Pioneer seeds and DuPont crop protection chemicals. But then corn prices peaked in August of 2012.
Let's talk about the activists.
Yeah.
Nowhere in your answer was the activists. What role, if any, in your opinion, did that play?
Well, I think the reaction of management to the activists was, oh, we really need to hit the quarterly target now. And it made them double down on something that I didn't like. You know, you've heard I thought that was a problem, and it just made them double down on it and emphasize the quarterly target even more. Activists didn't invent short-termism, they just maybe accentuated it a bit.
Big picture, you have been critical of Wall Street's many-time demands for double-digit earnings growth, especially for mature companies most times. Explain your challenge.
I've been writing about this since August of 1998. It's the long-term relationship between growth in corporate profits and growth in nominal GDP, which would be real GDP plus inflation. And long-term, they grow at the same rate, or at least they did up until the last decade or so. Nominal GDP now in the U.S. is probably growing about 3%. If we break out of this low inflation funk, you might get it up to 4 or 5%. It's not going to be much more than that. Yeah, we got a little extra growth in U.S. multinational corporations because the rest of the world was growing faster, at least China. But most of that growth was because the dollar declined from 2002 to 2011. And that boosted corporate earnings growth, and it at least gave companies the illusion that maybe it was possible to get double-digit earnings growth. Now the dollar has turned up. It rose slowly from 2011 to 2014. Since then, it's risen quite sharply. I don't think going forward you're going to get anything close to double digits. You may even fall short of growing as fast as nominal GDP.
Quickly tie that correlation into double-digit earnings growth. So it's not going to be there then?
No, I don't think so. You know, it may happen at tech companies, it may happen at pharmaceutical companies, but think about it. The average company's revenue is going to grow about in line with nominal GDP. As long as there are new companies being formed, the average existing company has to grow less rapidly than GDP. So if you have a business that's growing at GDP, that's by definition an above average business.
And briefly tie this into, when you look at DuPont now, do you agree what's going on?
I think there are some benefits to breaking DuPont and Dow up into smaller pieces, more focused pieces. I think the reason for doing the merger is if you had broken up just DuPont and just Dow, the individual pieces would have been too small to stand alone and they would have been gobbled up by somebody else. So you first had to combine so that you could break up, and each of the pieces that were broken up will have a critical mass to survive and succeed on its own.
Robert Fry, you've been a great guest. Back to you.
Need to catch up on your first watching? WHYY.org/first can help you do that. Past shows are there as well, including our conversation with the Delaware congressional delegation this past week.
What can we take away from both Governor Jack Markell's State of the State address and his budget? The best we know how to do that on First is with State of Play. And here to help, Stephanie Hansen, former Newcastle County president and attorney with the law firm Young, Conaway, Stargett & Taylor, and Michael Stafford, who is also a lawyer and columnist. His work is featured on MSNBC. Thanks, guys, so much for being here again.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Governor Markell was in our studios last week, and he cited some more robust DFAC numbers. And he's saying that those numbers justify his 5% increase in his budget. Is this a sign that Delaware's economy is doing better? Michael, why don't we start with you?
Well, I mean, to me, is it doing better for who? Doing better for the average Delawarean? I'm not so sure. I think there are pockets of increasing prosperity and success in this economy, but I think we still have challenges. And those challenges, I mean, we see it with DuPont. We see it with the closure of various businesses. A lot of the jobs that really sustained the sort of the blue collar and the lower middle class families in Delaware have gone away, and they've been replaced with what? The Amazon warehouse? I mean, we all can't stock shelves at Amazon. They're going to replace us with drones anyway one day. So prosperity for who? Better for who? I agree, it's looking up for some people, but is that broadly shared? I'm not so sure.
Well, we also, though, if you take a look at Delaware's economy versus the economy of our surrounding states, and not just Maryland and Pennsylvania, New Jersey, but also those that are a little further out, you'll see that Delaware is kind of an island that's actually expanding. Our economy is now expanding as opposed to those around us who are still recovering from the recession. So we are doing better, not by leaps and bounds, but we are doing better than our neighbors are.
Better for, and as Michael was saying, touching on his point, for whom, you know, are the really wealthy just doing better? And then the people who are working kind of on that lower tier of employment, are they doing better? And just sort of everyone in the middle's kind of, treading water, are we there?
Well, that's the question, an economy that works for who? You know, I mean, just nationally, I mean, Granted, Governor Markell has limited ability as the governor of a small state to kind of swim against the current on some of these national trends, but we have seen an economy in this country move from a model of more broadly shared prosperity and access to one that is more exclusivist and that is more sharply divided between the haves and the have-nots.
The big spending item in Markell's fiscal year 2017 budget, health care, the costs just keep going in that upward direction. What do you guys think about him calling on state employees and new state employees to sort of have to dig into their pockets and pay more for their health care?
I think everyone's having to do that. I mean, this is something that if you've been in private industry for a while, you've had to come face to face with that a few years ago now. So the increase that I understand that state employees are being asked to assume is going from $1.98 a month to $19.48 a month as an increase in how much they're going to pay for health care. That's still not a bad deal.
Yeah.
Again, it gets back to an economy that works for whom. In the private sector, I mean, we have seen, not everyone, but many of us have seen wage increases over the past several years be completely consumed, basically nullified, zeroed out by healthcare costs increasing. And that reality doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. When you're in the private sector and you're looking at folks working in the public sector, I think one of the dangerous dynamics is that the public sector workforce still has a lot of the benefits, the accoutrements that used to be common even in the private sector. You know, if you worked at GM or Chrysler, you got what? Great benefits and a pension when you retired. Well, who the heck has that anymore? None of us. Right. In the public sector, they do. And so it does breed a certain resentment between people who are stuck in this revolving door private sector where there is no security, there's increasing precarity, and folks in the public sector where you can work, you know, a few years, get vested in a pension, retire, go get a second job, earn that second pension. That's hard for people who are stuck in the private sector to take.
Markell's State of the State, he kind of was reminding all of us about how far Delaware has come. Do you think that he wants that to be his legacy, to remind people that we started off pretty low and we are far better off? And he was the guy who did it?
Yes, I think that's what his intention is, and I think that that's actually a pretty good story. Now he does have I don't want to say the benefit. He came in at a time when we were pretty far down in the tank, and as nationally we've been everyone's been making their way a little further up.
Things could only get better isn't exactly a compelling slogan for one's legacy. They're not going to put it on the Jack Markell gubernatorial, memorial library one day.
They could have said things would get worse.
Things could have been a lot worse. And to his credit, I mean, I think that is true to a point. He certainly was very proactive in trying to address some of the issues that we had when he first came into office, the closure of the automotive plants, the closure of the refinery in Delaware City, the big job losses that we took. Whether he did that, in a way that derived maximum benefit for the state, I'm not sure, but he certainly was proactive in trying to address those things, and he deserves some of the credit for that.
Okay, so that's where we're going to leave things. Stephanie Hansen, Michael Stafford, thank you so much for being here for State of Play, and we will see you next month.
For 25 years, a special group of people have been freezing for a reason. We're talking about the polar bear plunge. Last Sunday, people jumped in the ocean to support Special Olympics Delaware. First Experience introduces you to some of those plungers and an artist who creates awards for those hardy souls.
It's the 25th anniversary for the polar bear plunge. Every year they have an award for people who raise the most money. And instead of coming up with a plaque, they asked me to do polar bears in stained glass. And they liked it, and then year after year, we do the polar bear windows.
I started doing the plunge, I think I was about 22 years old. And when he was about 3, you started.
13 years ago.
Yeah, I couldn't keep him out. I didn't want him to do it. He just ran in right at, followed us. I do it for my brother. He's a Special Olympic athlete. He's been one for 44 years. He does all the hard stuff. He goes to practice and does all that. So I figured this was the least I could do. I have 9 awards in my house, and there's 2 or 3 at the beach hanging up. I love seeing the new design she comes up with each year. I mean, I think they're beautiful.
I started in December. It takes about 2 months. This year I had 164 pieces of glass that had to be cut out, and then they have to be ground, and then they have to be wrapped with copper foil tape, and then put back together again and soldered. There's cleaning, polishing, then I have to frame them, chain them, sign them, tag them, bag them. It's a lot of work, yeah.
I didn't know that it took so long to make them.
I mean, I figured it took a long time, but yeah, it's impressive. And
they're beautiful.
I love how each one's different. I love the colors, and it's amazing. We started volunteering with a local swim team for Special Olympics. And that kind of brought it all, like, 'cause this is easy. I mean, our part is easy for that. You just jump in the ocean and ask people to give you money. But once we started volunteering, it kind of made everything make sense. It just added much more meaning to the whole experience.
My uncle, he means a lot to me, so I figured I'd do anything for him. And the plunge it's not too bad. It's just a couple minutes of sharp needles everywhere.
So the polar bear windows, with them being like a different window each year, I hope that people would look at them and say, oh, I remember that year, that was the year, you know, this happened. I don't have any other state that's using stained glass polar bears as awards. I think it takes a lot, personally, for someone to jump into the ocean in the middle of the winter. You know, it's not just something you're giving money to. You're in your bikini in the ocean in February. You know, it's kind of crazy. I think it's cool. Yeah, I think it's pretty wild.
It helps so many people. I mean, just to watch my brother, my brother's very quiet, until you get him amongst his friends and his peers, and we're at Special Olympics practice, and he's talking up a storm, and Jason and I are like, who is this guy? Because this is not who we had at home. Watching him come out of his shell, to me that means more than anything.
I would hope that they would realize how great it makes the athletes feel when they get that gold medal at the end, and how easy it is to make them have that feeling. Like, we don't put in much work compared to what they put in, and it leaves us with a great feeling along with them. It's awesome.
This year's plunge raised over $820,000 for Special Olympics Delaware. Delaware sends athletes to the Connecticut Winter Games at the end of the month. And if you want to show your support for this group, go to SODE.org.
Next week, we are here twice. Wednesday, it's a first extra on education. Then up on Friday, we update the newly created Office of Animal Welfare, which is now up and running. What does this mean for Delawareans when it comes to animal control and pet adoptions?
Another busy week in Delaware. That is first, though, for this week. We thank you for watching. For Nichelle Polston and Mark Eichman, I'm Shirley Min. Have a great week. Go Polar Bear plungers and athletes.